The flying man was a brilliant experiment by Ibn Sina. The Muslim world was producing what would later on be called the Renaissance men. Andalusia, Cordoba, Granada, that these are centers of learning and they are attracting the best scholars and the best thinking. We are paradoxically and strangely and sadly enough, we are in a sense even way behind. I think if you said these things in some parts of the Muslim world, you may get in trouble because they'll say, we must maintain the absolute purity of Islamic thought. So many people in the Muslim world don't even speak Arabic. So how are you maintaining the purity of something you don't even fully understand?
So, hi everybody, welcome to another episode of Book Café Podcast. I'm your host, Omar Nizam, and in this episode, we will be talking about the book entitled The Flying Man, The Golden Age of Islam and Its Contribution to Science and Philosophy. And my conversation partner for this episode is somebody who needs absolutely no introduction, but suffice to say, he is a man who wears many hats because he's not only an author, but he's also an academic scholar, a film producer, and a diplomat. And he has also been called, and I quote, the world's leading authority on contemporary Islam by the BBC, as well as the most influential living authority on contemporary Muslim societies by the Saudi Gazette. So I'm delighted to welcome to the show Professor Dr. Akbar Ahmed. Hi, Professor. Welcome to the show. It's great to connect with you.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for that very warm introduction. It's a pleasure and an honor to be on this platform with you. So thank you for inviting me.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. The pleasure is all mine, sir. So, Professor Dr. Akbar Ahmed, we will, of course, get to talking about your book in just a moment. But before that, we here at Book Café Podcast love to know about our authors just as much as we love to know about the book or the books that we're discussing. So with your permission, I would love to start off by asking you a couple of questions about your early life. You were born in British India in Allahabad in 1943. Yes. And the partition of India and Pakistan took place in 1947. Can you tell us what was your experience as a child going through the partition of 1947 as well as your family's experience? Do please walk us through that.
Well, my father was a senior civil servant with the British Raj in the administration. And he was given a choice, as were all civil servants in India, to opt for one of the countries, Pakistan, or stay back in India and opt for India. And he opted for Pakistan because there was a tidal wave of emotions which was heightened when the killing and the violence began in India against the Muslims. So he opted, and he was lucky to be able to get some space in a train going from Delhi to Karachi, which was designated the capital of Pakistan. This all happening in 1947. So at the height of the riots and the killings, we went through the Punjab to Karachi. It's difficult to think of now, but a lot of the trains were massacred, the passengers were massacred, so that except for the engine driver, everyone was killed. And the idea was that the train would arrive like a ghost train as a lesson to the other side. So it was happening on both sides. Everyone was guilty. So the trains leaving Pakistan had dead Sikhs and Hindus arriving in Delhi with one engine driver, and the other way around, trains coming from Delhi with all the Muslim passengers slaughtered. So we were scheduled to be on a train which was leaving Delhi, and my mother, for some reason, refused to take that train. She had to buy provisions or whatever. So we took the next train. And because of that, we survived, because that previous train, which we should have taken, was completely decimated and slaughtered. And my father always said, it's a woman's intuition. You see, it's a woman's intuition. Always trust that. So somehow we survived. My earliest memory was of being in a train compartment. I remember the light, it was yellowish, because those train lights, if you were too young to remember any of this, but I don't think they had so much power in them. So they gave a ghostly kind of yellowish light, which was ghastly enough. But then my father, he's a very gentle, very amiable man, but from his posture, I saw that he was very tense. So he was telling us kids, don't make a noise, just keep quiet and get under the berths. And I said, why? And he said, you'll be hidden there, you'll be safe there. So I didn't understand why we'd be safe under the berth, because the berths, as you know, were completely exposed. But we went onto the berth and he said, don't make a noise. So the train would go along and then stop at various stations. And there'd be people around the train knocking on the doors and with obviously some bad intentions. So we were even more scared and apprehensive as to how this would all end, because there were terrible stories by that time of people being killed and slaughtered on both sides again. But somehow we made that journey. Now that left a terrible impression on me of a kind of communal madness that took over that entire region. Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, everyone was involved in that. When we arrived in Karachi, my father was given a large official house on Victoria Street next to the Clifton Bridge, a very well-known places. He was head of the Pakistan Railways in Karachi and doing a very important job, because at that stage, refugees were coming by train. Remember, there's no airline then. And the army had begun to be moved. So he had to report to Mr. Jinnah, Quaid-e-Azam, every week to account for where these passengers were and when they were arriving. So we were given this big house. And why I remember it is that refugees coming from India, again, a whole range of refugees from Bihar, Bengal, Hyderabad, Bombay, arriving in Karachi would come with a little chit, and they'd say, we're looking for the house of Saladin Saab, who was my father, and he'll look after us. So literally people would just come in the lawn. There were 2 tennis courts. Those lawns were full of refugees. He had set up tents for them. The corridors were full. So for the first 1 or 2 years, literally 30, 40 people would be living with us all the time. And they'd always find a roof there. All this made an impression on my mind, and in a sense became I think the emotional, it gave me that emotional energy to reach out to people who are not like me, not of my community, to try to understand why there was so much animus and hatred between the communities. I've been literally teasing this question over most of my life. I look at the Muslim community and I say, we have problems in India, we have problems in the Middle East, we have problems in Russia, China. Why is this? Number 2, what can we do about it to make relations better so that there's less pressure on ordinary Muslims? This is something that has connected me from the past and created some nightmares, because even now, Omar, it's many, many decades ago. Even now I have very disturbing sleeps at night when I'm just suddenly dreaming of something half awake, half asleep. And I imagine I'm on one train and another train is going by and my family's on that train. And there's no connection because somehow they've left me and I can't find my way to the other train. And there's no way I can make the train because I see it passing by. My cell phone is not working and there's no communication. And then I wake up. So I think obviously that's, I don't want to go in for any pop psychology, but obviously that whole trauma has continued to stay in my mind. Right. And it's important enough for me to then try to do something about it and not ignore it.
Indeed. Well, thank you for sharing that, sir. I cannot imagine how traumatic a time that must have been. But 1947 was unfortunately not the only traumatic event that you would experience in your life, sir. And I remember that just before we started, you did mention 1971 as well. And of course, that was the year that East Pakistan broke away and became Bangladesh. Where were you at the time? And can you tell us what your experiences were of 1971? Please walk us through.
Well, Omar, 71 was also a very traumatic time in a very different way, but also very traumatic. I was in what was then East Pakistan. The aim was of the central government, I think Ayub Khan had come up with this scheme that he would move the West Pakistani CSP officers to East Pakistan and vice versa. So, for example, I was in Mansehra, a lovely part of Pakistan, assistant commissioner, and I was moved to East Pakistan, and my batchmate, Shafi Sami, who went on to become, I think, the foreign secretary for Bangladesh, a very fine officer and a good friend of mine, he came to Mansehra and took over as assistant commissioner. So we arrived there, and an assistant commissioner, as you know, was called the SDM in Bengal, the subdivisional magistrate. So we had to deal with the magistracy, the executive, the revenue, a whole range of activity. But we were out in the field. We were, in fact, government in the field. So we were there to do a job, to provide service to people there, irrespective of whether they were Bengalis or Punjabis. And as the momentum began for the independence movement, and I was seeing it develop like a tidal wave, and I saw the lack of response of the central government, I realized that we would all eventually be in real trouble unless something was done about it. I was very lucky. I survived physically because of my batchmates. 4 batchmates were actually killed, 3 of them with their wives. Very brutally, they were really taken. The mobs arrived in their houses, took them out and shot them, and one of them was nailed against a tree, etc. So again, a very traumatic time. I was lucky because I was posted to Kishorganj, and my boss was Hassan Ahmed, who later became ambassador to the US, a very senior CSP officer, very fine officer, very fine officer. So anyway, back to 71, and as the momentum built up, my only aim was somehow to survive that, because I knew that tidal wave was building up, and I was able to get my wife out. We are going into 71 now, and I was then in Dhaka. Then I had one of these useless jobs, governor's inspection team. It wasn't a very helpful job. I just sat there in a huge building in Dhaka when my friend, Major Sabir Kamal, walked into the office wearing his full uniform. He belonged to the Frontier Force. Again, a good friend of mine from the Aptabad days when I was assistant commissioner there. And he walked in and he pulled out his revolver. He was wearing his full uniform. He pulled out his revolver and he cocked the gun and he put it next to my temple like this. Came around the table, put it next to my temple, and I said, Sabir, have you gone crazy? Because that damn thing would go off and I'll be dead. And he said, write. So I pulled out a sheet of paper and I began to write. And he said, to the chief secretary, he said, I would require leave, indefinite leave, and I'm leaving the post, etc., for personal reasons. I said, no, I can't write this because, number one, all CSP officers are banned from taking leave. We're just not allowed to because there's a national emergency. So I'm not going to break that law and try to get leave and try to get a favor. I'm not doing this. So he said, right, when we began to argue, he was a good friend, so he was trying to show me. He said, look, I know how these officers, and he was from the Punjab, and he said, I know how the Punjabi officers think. I said, look, elections have happened. The Awami League is one. Government has to transfer power, and that's that. There's no other way out of it. He said, no, you don't know how we think. He said, this is the time they will never hand over power. So I said, then it's madness, there'll be violence. He said, that's exactly what I'm saying. You've got to get out. And in the end, Omar, I was able to escape from all for all kinds of reasons. I came to West Pakistan. I was in Karachi. And again, the timing worked out that I was in Karachi and I got my orders for posting to Peshawar as deputy secretary, and therefore I escaped the denouement. But he didn't. He was up in Hilly, up in the north of what was then East Pakistan and now Bangladesh, and he was involved in an encounter. Again, it was one of those military encounters you read about where he was surrounded by an Indian regiment, a cavalry unit. And Sabir was an infantry officer. He had his infantry battalion with him. And the Indians said, look, we've surrounded you. We've got tanks. You can't fight foot soldiers against tanks. So surrender or you'll all be killed. And he said, no, I'll never surrender. And he didn't surrender. And he was killed with the people who were with him. So it was one of these ironies of fate. And again, I saw the bloodshed, the violence, the senseless violence. Friends on both sides, Bengalis, non-Bengalis. It made no sense to me at all, because if man was so irrational, it would lead to this kind of violence. So both in 47 and 71, I had very close encounters with a lot of the irrational impulses in our species, and the fact that we just don't seem to learn from these huge tragedies that we know of in history.
Indeed, sir. And thank you once again for sharing it with us. 47 was bad enough, but then having to relive some part of it again in 71, I really honestly cannot imagine. I just get goosebumps just listening to your recollection of both these events. But you did mention, sir, that you had also commemorated, I'm not sure if that would be the right word, or memorialized the events of 71 via a poem. And with your permission, we would love to have you read it out to us for the sake of our viewers and listeners.
Omar, that was I'm not a professional poet. I'm what in Urdu is called a patichar poet, which means you're just an amateur. You write for your own pleasure, if that's the word. So I went through that experience in 71. Again, it was deep in my subconscious. And I did think about it, talk about it, because now I'm in Peshawar. And one of the young men who came to stay with me was the younger brother of the chief secretary of Bengal, Shafiq Zaman, a very famous man. He was locked up in Varsak in one of the camps. He was like a prisoner. So this young man came and no one would talk to him. He was like an outcast. This straight after 71. People who weren't talking to Bengalis, they were abusing us and saying, "You're bingo lovers." They would call them bingo. And bingo, as you know, it was a bad term. It was like the N word here in America. And my wife and I were called bingo lovers. So this young man turned up and he didn't know where to go. He said, "I don't know where to go. How I want to meet my brother. He's here." So I told him, "You'll stay with me and I'll arrange everything." So I would arrange for him to go there and come back. And when Shafiq Zaman came out of that Varsak camp after some time, the first person he called on, he came to our house to show us honor and to show us gratitude. So I was very touched by that. And again, that transcends the divisions in human society. But it was at that time when this pent-up emotion of having gone through 71, because really for me, 71 meant it was the end of, in a sense, in a very dramatic, theoretical, hypothetical sense, the end of a dream called Pakistan. And whatever would remain, it would be a new kind of Pakistan, not the old Pakistan. And I knew that the Bengalis had been in the forefront of this movement. They had passionately invested in it and committed to it. And that, in a sense, West Pakistan had treated them shabbily and disgracefully and forced them into this situation. I know this because I was in the field in Kishorganj, Maniganj. And in the end, then began to use force, military force, to kill them and butcher them. And you can't do that. You can't have an army being used to kill your civilians and then expect them to love you. It just doesn't happen in history.
Absolutely.
So this poem then was bottled up in me. And literally, I woke up, I think, at 2 or 3 in the morning. And I asked my wife, who's always been a great supporter, but I'm sure she's quite fed up of this literary side of mine. And I said, "Give me a pen and paper quick." And literally, this poured out in one go. It wasn't written with any polishing and tweaking as poets often do. It just came out in one go. And that's the poem that I sent you because it's very raw and it has raw emotion. And Omar, I'd like you to read it if you don't mind, please.
Oh, of course, sir. Okay, so here we go. Sullen shine the stars, the moon in agony aloof. So still stand the palm trees, the seasons are bearing my dreams away. Sanity suspended while all the black horrors of the mind uncoil slowly, snakily, settle over this land. They came by night, they came in shame, they came to take the weapon and the woman. My throat was dry and chilled my groin, for they are taking them away to the slaughterhouses. Have you ever seen a child's head crushed like a coconut, or a proud man cry like a baby? Woman, like broken toys on the rail tracks to Santahar Junction. Bright flags fluttering from their thighs. Does it now matter which side did this or why? They were playing these games with death over there in the green lands of Bengal in the year of the Lord 1971. Oh, the storm that raged under the blue Bengal sky, within man and without him, when rape was relief, death a desire, and killing a madness. Mama, hide me in your arms, for they are taking them away to the slaughterhouses. Incest in the air, foul vapors in every mouth. Will nobody care to break this awful spell? The major swore he saw rows of what looked like round loaves of brown bread in the government college dining hall. These were sliced off, my sisters, while they writhed alive in the dormitories above. I'm curled, cursed, and cold alone in the night's chill womb, for they are taking them away to the slaughterhouses. Can all the waters of the bay, all the tears of the Orient, wash the red stains and ugly scars of hate inflicted in that single moment of suicide, compelled by an irresistible lust for self-destruction? When a house is empty, the family missing, and silence a way of life, The nights get chilly, the nights get lonely, and in the night, strong men break down to cry, for they are taking them away to the slaughterhouses. When Biharsi fate was sealed, and Bengali destiny designed, when the scythe was an argument and the bullet an answer, the lords of men, gods of pain, have taken counsel. The unholy juggernaut will move, it is decreed, and none to challenge it. What compulsions drive such men? What fear makes them such savages, while reason so thin on the breast deserts so quickly? Who was martyr, which one saint, depended only on the language he spoke. To such a fine point is the concept of alienation reduced, for there is no shame like the shame of taking them away to the slaughterhouses. Wow. That is amazing. Sir, you wrote this in one go, and I just cannot tell you just how I'm shaking while reading this, because it is your truth and what you saw. And as an eyewitness to 1971, I thank you once again, sir, for sharing this.
Thank you, Umar. Thank you for sharing this with your viewers, because as you appreciate, it's a red hot and therefore as honest a feeling from deep inside me as possible. And some of these lines, when I look back now, they're very emotional for me. When a house is empty, the family missing, and silence a way of life, the nights get chilly, the nights get lonely, and in the night, strong men break down to cry, for they are taking them away to the slaughterhouse. Because that is what was happening, you see, and it was like a breakdown of everything around. And remember, I'm a young assistant commissioner who's very proud to have be part of this service with the belief that we are there to serve people, the civil service of Pakistan. Obviously, it was failing, it has diminished from an ideal, but this is what drove us, at least a lot of people who thought like me, that we were there to do our best and best service. So what we were seeing was a breakdown in everything we believed, and we just couldn't hold it or control it. And the tragedy was, Omar, that when some of us who survived went back to Pakistan, we went to Islamabad and met these very senior civil servants, very, very senior central secretaries. They literally dismissed us. They said, you're talking nonsense. Literally, they say, you're talking nonsense. We said, sir, there's a full-fledged civil war. You cannot control it through guns. You can't kill people. You can't kill everyone. In some senses, same argument is taking place in the Middle East right now, in Ukraine right now. And they just got angry with us. They said, how dare you talk like this? You're young people, you'll ruin your careers. Don't go around spreading nonsense like this. Because that's bureaucracy, you see, with blinkered eyes. Except, Umar, and for your record, I must put this on record, except for two men I was very privileged to know and who liked me enough to give me access. One was Yaqub, General Yaqub. So as I landed in Karachi, I went straight to his house. Mm-hmm. And as I entered his drawing room, he wasn't meeting anyone. He was sort of under a cloud, and there were rumors he may be tried in Pakistan because they said the Pakistan government had ordered him to use force and fire, and he did not obey those rules. And as I walked into his drawing room, he said, Akbar, this is how he's a very intellectual man. First point he made, Akbar, how long do we have? That's all he asked. And I said, 6 months, sir. And he sat down as if I had punched him in the stomach. And he said, 6 months, explain it to me. So I said, sir, you are fighting because your soldiers are very good soldiers, excellent soldiers, but they're trained for the plains of the Punjab. It's infantry. You go in with your infantry, and the tanks come. Then they're fighting a civil war. It's a war that's a guerrilla war. A guerrilla war means that people who are serving you dinner or arranging for your water may be poisoning it. The entire population is now involved. So it's not just regiments out in the field. It's going to be a kind of war that you have no idea how to check or control, because without talking, without dialogue, without compromise, this is going to end in disaster. I said, this is my assessment. Then I went up to Islamabad. The second man, one again for history, I'm pointing this out, was President Ayub Khan. By then he had retired. He was under a cloud because Bhutto was Prime Minister, and there were all kinds of rumors about Ayub Khan himself that they may try him, do something to him, etc. But he was left alone. So he always was very kind to me because I knew the family. So he came down and we talked. We talked for about an hour. And he said, you cannot fight on both fronts. You can't have a war going on with India hostile and maybe invading East Pakistan. There's 71, remember? And then you have a civil population fighting you. So it's two fronts. You just cannot do this. So he was very gloomy and he said there's no way to deal with East Pakistan because he had a historic appreciation of East Pakistan. So apart from these two, Omar, I saw that the feeling was very hostile, very blinkered, very closed ideas, and people would shout at me over dinner and say, this is in Islamabad. And they would say, you don't know what one cavalry regiment can do. It can go from one side of Bengal to the other side, etc., etc. And that's when people started calling my wife and me bingo lovers because they said, you're just foolishly arguing for the Bengalis. And they would say all sorts of very stupid and very racist things. Bengalis are cowards. They can't stand up. We'll wipe them out. One regiment is enough, etc. And I would feel that it was futile because you cannot argue with ignorant people. If you don't know and you're that ignorant that you're actually making statements like this, which are racist and which are ignorant of history and culture and the tradition of military warfare, then there is no point in arguing because in the end, you just annoy these people and they begin to abuse you. So we went through a lot of trauma, and that's where this poem came out, you see, at the end of it all.
Absolutely. And I can say, sir, with that one action of yours, I think you've won a lot of millions of fans back home in Bangladesh. And as a Bangladeshi, I tip my hat to you, sir, for your courage, for standing up to the powers that be and all that was going on at the time. And in fact, your actions do remind me of one more thing, sir, and that is, it reminds me of the Quranic verse which says, bear witness to the truth, even if it be against yourselves. And that is exactly what you've done. So once again, sir, I thank you on behalf of all of us in Bangladesh.
Thank you. It was a difficult time.
Indeed.
And what kept me going on was my faith, because I tell you this, you're a young Bengali from that part of the world, some of the finest people I met, literate, warm, affectionate, passionate for Pakistan, were Bengalis in 71. But when Pakistan started shooting at them and killing them, they asked me, President Ayub Khan asked me, I said, sir, till March, I would say if there was a poll, 90% would have still voted for Pakistan. You deprived them of jobs. You humiliated them the way you treated Bengalis. It was unforgivable, unacceptable. And yet they voted for Pakistan. But after March, you're shooting them, you're killing them. How do you expect them to vote for you? It's not logical, it's not sensible. So that was my experience of Bengal. Very fine, very warm people and very literate. What really impressed me was how intelligent they were. I had civil servants, colleagues. One of them was called Shelley. He used to write poetry. I don't know whether he's still in the service or not, but they were very much into literature, into writing, into producing, and having debates and discussions.
Indeed.
So,
absolutely. And I can completely understand just what an emotional time it was for you personally, sir, for having lived through it. And once again, I really cannot thank you enough for sharing this with our audience.
Well, thank you, Umar, and I hope I'm not sharing too much of my personal story, because Bengal does bring out a very emotional side of mine, because I feel it was such a, it was well-deserved independence, but very tragic from my side, because they were two brothers. And they split up in this very tragic way, and I hope they are much closer together, because I know in their hearts they have a great deal of affection for each other.
Indeed, sir. And thank you once again. So now let's get into our episode proper by talking about the amazing book that you've written, The Flying Man. What was the what was the germ of the book, and when did you write it and why did you write it? Please walk us through that.
Well, Omar, I wrote it largely during the lockdown, during the time we were locked up in our homes, when COVID was at its height. I mean, literally thousands of people were dying, and it was advisable to stay as much as possible locked up. And as I was locked up, I began to read and I began to think. And one of the historical periods that really struck me was the golden age of Islam. Of course, we read about it and we had some idea about it. But what point it made to me, the big point, maybe 3 points, was number one, how high Islamic reputation was during the Golden Age. And remember, the Golden Age stretches for almost 700-800 years. It goes on from what 8th, 9th century up to the 13th, 14th century, the whole chunk of history.
Mm-hmm.
And the space, I mean, we are talking about a space from Spain right up to India, right up to your Bengal. So and into Central Asia. And the level of the production, you've got Ibn Rushd, you have Al-Ghazali, you have Kindi, you have Al-Farabi. I mean, these are giants in any culture, any time in history. But to produce this galaxy of scholars and astronomers and mathematicians and writers, Al-Farabi and Farabi, of course, is so influential. Again, not many people know about him. He influences Ibn Sina then, and Ibn Sina, of course, writes his books on medicine. Ibn Firnas, how many people know, Omar, that he's the first man in history to attempt flight? Not many people know this. So he's a typical golden age of Islam intellectual. He's a writer, he's a mathematician, he's a discoverer, he invents things, and he wants to experiment in flight, and he takes off, and apparently he was up in the air for about 10 minutes. And if you go to Cordoba today, you'll see a huge bridge in the shape of wings, and to honor him.
Right.
There's a crater on the moon to honor him. So not Muslim, but other people acknowledge him. And in the Arab world, there's some airports named after Ibn Firnas. So he was a typical product of the golden age of Islam. Umar Khayyam. Yeah. Umar Khayyam is at the other end of the Muslim world, the Persian part of it. Again, he's a mathematician, and that's what he's known for. But he's also a poet. He writes these amazing quatrains, which are picked up by Fitzgerald in London, who translates them. And the first year, not a single copy of his book is sold. And then it becomes the bestseller in the British Empire. Secondly, Omar, what struck me about that age was the role of women. So if you look again at history, women are playing a very important role. The greatest university, the oldest, is in Fez, and it's still extant. Can you imagine a university built in the 7th, 8th century, which is still functioning, long before Oxford and Cambridge? Fatima, she was the one who launched it. So women played a critical role. And thirdly, the third point which strikes you at that period, and struck me certainly, was the high level of interfaith activity. So you had Ibn Rushd writing in Cordoba, but you had Saint Thomas Aquinas, the greatest Christian saint scholar. He's a giant. He's the man who is considered the ultimate scholar. He's Pope Francis's hero and so on. He quoted Ibn Rushd over 500 times. I mean, just think, it's mind-boggling. Maimonides, the great chief rabbi, the great rabbi, is considered one of the greatest in history. He and Ibn Rushd were interacting intellectually, and they were all affecting each other and their thought. So this is another aspect which I think we've sort of lost in our contemporary times. So that's what compelled me or propelled me to write this and to really explore that time. It was a pleasure. And finally, of course, Omar, it was great to get away from all the misery of the world with talk of COVID and people dying and COVID spreading and all these terrible rumors. Is it from Wuhan? Who's behind it? And what conspiracy was it to wipe out Western civilization, etc.? So it was really a great escape, and escaper into 1,000 years back. There was also the Islamophobia, which had been unleashed along with COVID. And I found that it was really good for me as a Muslim to be able to get back to a place where I was not only welcome, but I was an honorable citizen, and where I looked at other Muslims and their achievements with great honor.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. And I think the world is all the more richer for you having written this book, sir. So we thank you once again for doing that. But just coming back to the title of the book, Professor, is Ibn Firnas the eponymous flying man, or does the flying man refer to something else as well?
No, something else, because what people often mistake that, because people say flying man and they think Superman or one of the Marvel heroes. The flying man was a brilliant experiment by Ibn Sina. Again, he's one of those polymaths. The Muslim world was producing what would later on be called the Renaissance man. The polymath who's a painter, writer, philosopher. That's what the Muslim world was producing. Later on you'd have Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci. also described as the Renaissance. So Ibn Sina was a great philosopher, great physician. He comes up, as you know, he writes the canon of medicine, which would be used by Western hospitals for the next 700 years. That's how great he was as a man of science. Mm-hmm. He also experimented with the idea of what's called the flying man or the floating man, where he said if you took a human body, because there was a great debate in those days about the soul and its relationship to the body, especially what happens when you die, and are you still alive? Do you still have a soul? How do you reckon your life on earth as distinct from the life after you die, etc.? So these are philosophic debates constantly taking place in relation to God. Mm-hmm. It's Ibn Sina who argues that God cannot not exist, so there must be a God. It's fascinating debates. Mm-hmm. So he came up with this experiment that if you took a man and suspended him in midair, his arms outstretched, he closed his eyes, so he can't see anything. So he knows he has a body, but he can't see it. He can't touch it because his hands are, and he's suspended in the air. He will still know that he has a soul because he can think. He's still got a mind. And this was called the flying man. Absolutely. And I was thinking, I really stepped back and I said, my God, in social sciences, in history, you have Plato and the concept, of the shadows in the cave, the form. So this Plato, one of the great experiments in thought. You then have Nietzsche and the concept of the Superman, the Übermensch. Mm-hmm. So you have these great thoughts of philosophers in human history, and you have Ibn Sina, the flying man. And yet the flying man is virtually unknown. So I thought that it's interesting for me as a Muslim social scientist to point out that we have something which is really the equivalent of Plato's Shadows in the Cave.
Shadows of the Cave. Indeed, sir. And after this book, I'm quite sure that the flying man would be as popular as Plato's allegory of the cave, and we can always hope for that to happen. But just coming back to the title of the book, Professor, it does have an alternative title which I would like to put to you, and the alternative title is The Flying Man, Aristotle, and the Philosophies of the Golden Age of Islam, Their Relevance Today. So having Aristotle in the title of the book, it must mean something. Please tell us why we've put Aristotle there.
Aristotle, Omar, I am amazed, was very important to the philosophers of the Golden Age of Islam for many reasons. Aristotle is important because of his thinking, because of the logic of his presentation, and above all, his insistence on evidence, on fact. So he doesn't want theory and opinions. He says everything that you're presenting in terms of your scholarship should be based in logic and in reason versus revelation. It's a very important distinction very early on, coming from the Greeks, more than Plato and Socrates. So it's Al-Farabi who first picks up Aristotle and masters him. It's a very important point I'm making, because until then, Aristotle is known as on the periphery. But Farabi begins not only to understand him, but decode him, what he meant. Sometimes there was, for example, a big debate about what exactly he meant. He uses an expression that I read this book 40 times. And Muslim scholars would puzzle, what does that mean, 40 times? Does it mean he actually sat and read it 40 times? Mm-hmm. Farabi decoded that to mean that it's a form, it's an expression. Like you have expression that he did this so many times, and then saying so many times, I read 40 times. It's just a form, an expression, a form of using language. Farabi's translation then is picked up by Ibn Sina, again, because he's living after him. So he's in a bazaar, he's buying books, and the owner of the bazaar says, "Sir, you must buy this book of Farabi's." And he said, "No, I don't need another book." He said, "No, please read this. It'll be to your benefit." He takes the book home, reads it, and he understands the importance of Aristotle. And he then picks up Farabi's arguments and Aristotle, and he uses him in his own writing. So to me, Aristotle is a kind of entry point for Greek thought to come into Islamic thought. Mm-hmm. Not to distort or pervert Islamic thinking, but to add the notion of clarification, evidence-based, rational-based thinking and presentation of ideas, so that everything you're saying must be backed up with evidence and fact. Now, all this is then picked up by Ibn Rushd in Cordoba. Again, I'm giving a sequence of and the chronology of these thinkers. So by the time we come to Ibn Rushd, he, of course, picks this up fully. So he then argues that, look, there's a debate between reason and revelation. Now, the church in England, in Europe said, sorry, it's only revelation. It comes down from heaven, and that's what you must accept. And those people talking of reason are heretics. And, there was a lot of persecution against people like that. And this is the point when Ibn Rushd begins to make an impact on Christianity and on Judaism. Right. This argument is then picked up by Maimonides and St. Thomas Aquinas and brought into the larger non-Muslim world. Muslims react to Ibn Rushd, as you know, in a rather ambiguous way. And at one stage, he's chased out of Cordoba. As is Maimonides. Yeah. The difference is that Sultan Saladin in Cairo picks up Maimonides and appoints him as his physician, a very popular physician with a great deal of respect. And his children and his descendants, his sons, become chief rabbis in Cairo and so on. And Ibn Rushd is not treated that well, and it's a very sad last image of a snapshot of Ibn Rushd, who's when he's dying or dead, his body is taken to the grave on a donkey, and the books fall off. And Ibn Arabi attends that ritual, and Ibn Arabi writes about it because Ibn Arabi admired Ibn Rushd. Indeed. So that is where Aristotle comes in, and then the subtitle points out that there are many lessons that we can learn today. Because if you're locked up as I was, what are you thinking? What can we benefit from this? And we can benefit a lot because a lot of the youngsters in the Muslim world need to, number one, understand their own culture and then understand the breadth, the depth, and the brilliance of that culture, and try. No, everyone can't be an Al-Farabi, but try to recreate some of that spirit in order to be able to contribute to the world, to the sum of human knowledge. And the method, of course, is to rely on scientific evidence, scientific rigor. And that's what the message is for today's world.
Indeed. And what I find fascinating, Professor, is the fact that the Golden Age philosophers, Muslims philosophers, were not averse to taking from what was already there vis-a-vis Greek philosophy and then putting their own ideas, adding to the body of knowledge that was already there. And do you ever bemoan the fact that this is something that maybe we have failed to do as modern Muslim philosophers and thinkers? Because I sense that sometimes we have this aversion towards anything that is pre-Islamic. We tend to think that that's all the period of ignorance, al-Jahiliyyah. There's really nothing to learn from that time period. But as you've rightly demonstrated in the book, the early philosophers were not averse to learning from the civilizations that came before them.
Of course, and that's where the relevance of Aristotle comes in, or people like that, if you want to refer to our part of the world, South Asia, the use of Hindu philosophers and scholars. The very concept of the zeros came from Hinduism, which was then picked up by the Arabs and becomes part of Arab numerals, but they were actually coming from Sanskritic knowledge. So you see, when a civilization doesn't have an inferiority complex or doesn't have any complexes, it can then openly interact on an intellectual level. And the whole notion of Baghdad as the center of the world in terms of knowledge and civilization, or Andalusia, Cordoba, Granada, it was precisely this, that these are centers of learning, and they're attracting the best scholars and the best thinking to their centers. And of course, with that, if they are Hindu or they are Buddhist or they are Greek, they're all welcome because they're adding to the sum of knowledge. And this is what Al-Farabi so brilliantly pointed out, one. And I want your viewers, if they're Muslim, to listen carefully to this. Al-Farabi, remember, these are all very religious people. So all of them, Al-Farabi or Ibn Sina, they're all Orthodox Muslims. So Al-Farabi, on the basis of his study of the Quran, Ibn Sina knew the Quran by 10, he knew it by heart, he was a Hafiz and so on. So Ibn Farabi argued that God's names are Rahman and Rahim. That's in the Quran. Mm-hmm. So therefore God is compassionate and kind. God is also Haqq, which means he is truthful. So God is not going to create religions in this world, whether it's Buddhism or whether it's Hinduism, and then create a false religion. Therefore, God has created in this universe religions for every people and it says in the Quran, we have given you different religions, different people, for different people, so that those people also have access to the divine in their own way. But ultimately, it all reflects on the approach and the attempt of human beings to worship God. And this was Al-Farabi's argument. And again, at that time, it wasn't shocking or new, but it was something that people accepted and appreciated. I think if you said these things in some parts of the Muslim world, you may get in trouble because they'll say, we must maintain the absolute purity of Islamic thought. What does that mean? How do you have the absolute purity? After so many people in the Muslim world don't even speak Arabic. So how are you maintaining the purity of something you don't even fully understand, especially in our part of the world?
Yes, indeed. And I think that's a very poignant, sir. Let's talk about one more historical figure from the Golden Age that we missed out on, Al-Ghazali. He lived before, after Avicenna and before Averroes, Ibn Rushd. And he wrote a book called The Incoherence of the Philosophers. What was Al-Ghazali's issue with Greek philosophy? And what was the rebuttal that Averroes, Ibn Rushd had given to him afterwards?
He was, again, one of these giants, absolute giant. There's no disputing him, although I know that in more recent Muslim literature, he's seen as a kind of too orthodox, as it were, too much on the right. But he wasn't. He was a man who was constantly intellectually seeking and trying to come to the right answers from his point of view. Remember that he had one of the top jobs in Baghdad. He was a very senior, holding a very prestigious chair. And he left it all. And he was being invited to the court and he was being wined and dined by people. Not wined, but certainly respected and honored. And he left it all, Omar, and went off on a journey, like all scholars do. It's a kind of almost a route that a lot of scholars take to find themselves or to find the world they're living in. And he was seen then sweeping the mosque and the courtyard in Damascus and so on. When he came back, he had resolved, because he wanted to understand Sufism. He wanted to see how far you can move from the orthodox path into Sufism without leaving Islam, without leaving Orthodox Islam. That too, at that time, if you recall, there was a very intense debate about this. So there's the Greeks, there's the influence of mysticism and so on. These are all great. It showed the vitality. The Muslim world is alive and there's a debate taking place. And when he came back, he then wrote up his classic Ihya al-Ulum, the great work of his. And do you know that Muslim scholars have said and still say, for example, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf in America was one of the most renowned scholars of Islam, that if all the books of Islam were destroyed and that one book survived, Islam would still survive. So you still had that great impact that he had made. Today, in the critics of Islam select him for their target, or their wrath, if you like, because they see him as too rigid and too orthodox. But again, they haven't read Ghazali. They must read him more seriously and understand what he's trying to achieve.
Indeed. And as you also wrote in the book, Professor, the golden age of Islam was not just Muslims who were participating in creating this civilization. And you mentioned Rabbi Maimonides, the Rambam, who was arguably probably the greatest Jewish rabbi there has ever been, and Thomas Aquinas. What was it about this particular time period that enabled luminaries like Maimonides and Thomas Aquinas to actually thrive and contribute towards what was the golden age of Islam? I mean, was it security, or was it just a blip in time that was just a one-off that we may not ever see again? But I'll let you tell us about that.
Well, that's a great question. It's a great question, and I have thought a lot about it. As a former administrator, I've thought a lot about it, because you see, a scholar just doesn't need a typewriter and to be left alone. The scholar needs a whole structure around him. He needs a university campus. He needs colleagues to be critical of his work, to give him feedback. He needs publications. He needs a journal. He needs to be able to share his findings with students who can then criticize him or then respond to him in one way or the other. So there's an entire paraphernalia, a structure around the individual scholar. Above all, there's security, there's the nitty-gritty of living, the fact that a scholar has to eat, he has to be warm, he has to be sheltered. Now, you'll find that many of the rulers of the Muslim world in the Golden Age would be patrons of these scholars. So it's not, you see, again, if you look at Muslim society in a holistic sense, today, if a ruler is kind to a scholar, it's like, oh, look, what a great favor I've done. No, this was part of the Islamic ethos. A Muslim ruler had to support knowledge because the Quran told him that knowledge is the ultimate aim. The word knowledge is mentioned, ilm, more times in the Quran than any word except God. The mention of God and then ilm, again and again and again. So the ruler also was aware of this. And there are many examples. It's not just I'm saying this to prove a point, but I've studied, for example, in Cordoba, Amir Abdul Rahman, one of the greatest names in Islam, amazing man. Or his grandson, again, Abdul Rahman III. It was known that he would come himself and sit in the corner of the mosque every Friday. So he'd spend the evening with strangers, visitors, students involved in debate and discussion. And they're watching the situation. So if there's a scholar who's in need of something, so all right, come as my guest. Here you have a house, an assistant, paper, pen, whatever you need so you can do your work. So that was also provided by the rulers again and again, and you'll see this in Islamic history. So to answer your question, if the scholars of today are given that support, they'll be able to produce some unique material, and they'll be able to come up with far greater and far more sophisticated thinking than at present, because at present I find, and I've known scholars, you'll have known scholars, some very brilliant scholars, they are fighting to survive. They need their jobs. Sometimes they're not getting their pay. So forget anything. They've got a wife and kids who are saying, forget your books. We need you to go and earn some money for us. A scholar just can't do that. He's not a Superman where he can juggle all these things at the same time. So he does need support. And when I say he, I mean he or she, because Muslim women were also producing great stuff at that time. So to think about reviving that spirit, our rulers have to help. They have to help by giving resources, and then giving them the freedom. Let them write what they want to write. You may not like what they're writing, but let them write and let them then defend what they're writing on the basis of logic, on the basis of their work. That's that. And these names that we are talking about, remember, they're writing 1,000 years ago, and we are talking about them today, and so many centuries later. That itself is proof that they are alive.
Right, indeed. So scholars need patrons, and they need security, and they also need encouragement at a lot of things. And I think that, if God willing, if we have those things coming back anytime soon, I'm sure that another golden age will be upon us. But just tell me one thing, Professor, with regards to the Ottoman Empire, who you could say were the heirs to the Islamic Empire after 1258 when Baghdad was sacked. Was there anything that they were doing differently that didn't produce as many luminaries as the Golden Age period Muslim philosophers?
Again, Umar, it's a very good question, and I've thought a lot about this. You see, they were also empires, and they called themselves Muslim empires. Remember, the Ottomans always said, we are a Muslim empire, although some of their most important officials were either Christian or Christians were picked up and converted to Islam. The difference, as I see it, is structural. The Ottoman Empire was an empire. The Mughal Empire was an empire. The Safavids were an empire. What does an empire mean? It's a vast territories, vast armies, vast wealth. And the ruler is now like a little pharaoh. He's like a little dictator with so much power and so much authority. It goes to his head. He's no longer a humble servant of God. And he wants writers and authors to be saying what a great ruler you are. You are like the sun, you're like the moon. So it's human nature. This happens in any society. I mean, see what's happening here in Western societies, which are supposed to be democracies. So go back to this comparison. The early Arabs who erupted from the Arabian Peninsula were much closer to the ideal in Islam, which was given by the Holy Prophet of Islam, peace be upon him. Face-to-face society, humility, simplicity. So all the early caliphs, whether it's Umar or Ali, they dress simply, they eat simply. We know this because it's all recorded. Go down now and make a comparison to the empires. Do you think that the Ottoman emperor was even accessible? The Ottoman emperor, and you know how they were selected, that once one of them was made emperor,
Right.
every male relative was immediately throttled, garroted, they were killed. Necks were broken and they were dead. That's not human. That's not. With the Mughals, one of the reasons that there was a downfall of the Mughal Empire, that they were fighting amongst themselves. Aurangzeb killed his Dara Shikoh and he killed his other brothers, constantly inter-family fighting. So there's a great difference. And the third thing is, I find that by then, the vitality in Muslim society had begun to fade in the empires. So they didn't have that, what we call jazba, that enthusiasm, that dynamism. When Abdul Rahman lands in Cordoba, he comes with an idea of Islam. He's there with an idea of Islam which is open, dynamic, embracing all. So you remember the head of the Umayyads was a Caliph and his wife was Christian. So when Abdul Rahman arrives in Cordoba, he doesn't have any hang-ups about Christians. So he absorbs them. That's why so many Jews and Christians were living with the Muslims in Andalusia. There were problems, but by and large, they had long periods of harmony, precisely because the rulers understood that we are living as an intercultural, interfaith society. Right. So yes, there was a difference. And I think the final big difference I found was that what prevailed in the Golden Age was what I call the Ilm-Ethos. The Ilm-Ethos I defined as containing three features of Islam. The pursuit of knowledge or ilm, and I've described that to you about the importance of ilm in the Quran. Number two, the notion of adl or justice. So there's a notion that society must give justice, whether you're poor or rich. And all rulers tried to achieve that, whether they were the Mughals or the Ottomans, but you no longer had that access because they were empires. There were huge bureaucracies. And thirdly, the notion of ihsan or compassion. And again, the bigger the empire, the less the compassion, because you don't have access. You don't have access to the rulers. In these earlier societies, the Ilm-Ethos was very strong and very palpable and very much in evidence. And I think that also began to weaken as time passed on. So if we want in our societies to recreate some of that, the first thing we have to do is to try to recreate the Ilm-Ethos. Right. Now ask yourself, one, look around you, you're from a very important Muslim nation. Look around you and ask yourself, how many of the people running that country or running those countries who come to Pakistan and ask this question, how many rulers represent the Ilm-Ethos? And how do they translate that? And you'll see that in these three boxes, maybe they get one, take off one, but the other two, they may fail. So unless the three work together, it doesn't work.
Yeah, absolutely right, sir. And I think Ilm-Ethos is such a wonderful term that you've coined in the book that it really is something that we must try and popularize as much as possible. And you mentioned Caliph Abdul Rahman III a couple of times, Professor. And although this name didn't make it into the book, I do believe from my knowledge of history that he had a Jewish vizier by the name of Ibn Shaprut.
Yes.
And so I would like to ask a tangential question. Given what we're seeing right now in the Middle East, how important is it for us to be reminded of these stories about the relationship of let's say somebody like Caliph Abdul Rahman III and Ibn Shaprut and Saladin and Maimonides in terms of fostering good Jewish-Muslim relations and combating anti-Semitism and Islamophobia at the same time?
Well, excellent question, excellent observation, because we are living in a time when you have a sort of unleashed and widespread Islamophobia. And remember, I was a commissioner of the Runnymede Trust Commission, which gave you the concept of Islamophobia. If you look up the 97 product of the Runnymede Trust Commission, the first book on Islamophobia, that is the time when we came up with this concept. Not a brilliant concept, but it was the nearest thing that we could think of in terms of trying to capture this hatred against Muslims and Muslim culture and Muslim peoples. And I ask myself now, today, it is so widespread, what are we doing to counter it? There were times when Muslims were in a position and they demonstrated their humanity and they demonstrated their nobility. So for me, the example you've given of Abdul Rahman, and there are many, many examples like Abdul Rahman, many of them. There's the ruler who's the Amir, his chief minister is a Jewish fellow. His foreign minister, as you know, Abdul Rahman, was a Catholic archbishop. So that man represented him in the courts of Europe. Saladin, of course, is legendary. It's absolutely legendary. One of my great heroes, because at the moment of triumph, he's just taken back Jerusalem. I mean, it's so relevant because we are talking about the Middle East now. Saladin has promised as a young man that he will revenge what happened in Jerusalem when the Crusaders took it over. And they slaughtered the Jews, they burnt them in their synagogues, they slaughtered the Muslims, and they even slaughtered the Christians who were not from Europe. They also had that distinction. So Saladin grew up with that trauma in his mind and people around him, and they said, when you take it and when we take it, we're going to take revenge. And he takes Jerusalem, and there's that famous scene, he's standing outside the fort, the ramparts of Jerusalem, and they've lined up all the prisoners, and his lords and his generals say, okay, that's it, now take revenge, slaughter them all. And he says, no. Free those who can pay for themselves. In those days, there was some kind of token ransom money. They're freed, free to go. Right. Those who can't afford it, he will pay for them from his own estate. I mean, it's mind-boggling. Where are the Jews? There are no Jews allowed. They've been banned from Jerusalem. He said, allow them back.
Absolutely.
And what about these bishops and so on who are taking their gold away from their church? He said, allow them. They're people of God. Don't interfere with them. This is Saladin at his height. He just recaptured Jerusalem. Now, to me, that's a much greater model of humanity than what I'm seeing today, where people are being butchered and killed and kids being blown up, etc. What will history remember? What I want you to just think, step back and think for a moment, not as a Muslim or non-Muslim, think as a human being, a thinking human being. Today, Saladin, if you read European literature, they honor Saladin. It's amazing that the man who conquered Jerusalem is the most honored Muslim in history, in European history. In Dante, Dante wrote this Inferno. He's the only Muslim, I think, him and Hazrat Ali, who are given a special status in the next world.
Inferno. Yeah.
Because he honors them. And of course, he's the hero of so many books of Sir Walter Scott, etc. And generally, he's known as a very noble and a very great chivalric. The whole notion of chivalry comes from Saladin into Europe. The notion of chivalry and knighthood is coming from Saladin, not the other way around.
Wow.
So I think these people lived up to their own idea of Islam, and they lived up to that noble concept, so that when Saladin dies, I'm always very moved by this because, we know our own rulers and their corruption. When he dies, he has one saddle, whole worn out saddle, one sword, and one Quran.
Wow.
That's all he's left behind. Because all his estate he shared with scholars, with students. He spent his time in the evenings in the colleges talking to these students. So again, I go back to my point that reform or change cannot come from one person. It can't be Omar saying, I'm going to change things. It's got to be holistic. It's got to be everyone involved. And you can only be involved if you understand that this is my tradition. It's coming. I have a holy book. I have an ethos. And that ethos has been shaped and refined by what we are calling Ilm-Ethos. And in order for me to appreciate my own worth, I must try to develop it.
Fascinating. Fascinating, sir. At this point in time, I think that I have pretty much exhausted all of my questions for the episode. But before I let you go, sir, I do have some surprise guest questions, which I would like to ask you with your permission. And so the first surprise guest question that we have is from somebody whom you know very well and you're well acquainted with. He is Dr. Mike Gauss, the director of the Center for Pluralism.
Yes.
And the author of the book American Muslim Agenda. Mike Gauss is also a friend of the show, and we've also recorded an episode with him. And his question to you, sir, is, Dear Dr. Ahmed, you've written so many books over the years, including this latest one. What is the one thing that you wish or hope to accomplish through the writing of all your books?
Mike, my friend, first of all, let me salute you. Mike has been a champion of interfaith dialogue. He's been consistently standing up, speaking, and very boldly at times. People don't appreciate this, but very boldly. And I've seen him through the last several decades. So I really admire the work he's doing. The one wish that I would have, Mike, is the one you would have, which is we pray that people read our books. Our job is to write them. We hope and pray that people read them and pick them. And that's all we want. We don't write bestsellers. There's no scandal or sex or anything in these books. They're academic books, so they're cut and dried. But we hope people will read them and learn from them and enable their lives to be improved.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And more power to you, sir, and to Dr. Mike Gauss. I know that you guys are extremely good friends, and we're so lucky to have both of you on the show at this point in time. And so the second guest question that I have, Dr. Ahmed, is also somebody that you are acquainted with, and his name is Barrister Yasser Latif Hamdani. He's the author of the book Jinnah, A Life. And his question to you is, Dear Dr. Ahmed, do you feel that the Islamic world would have benefited had Al-Ghazali not arrived on the scene and gone after the philosophers of the Golden Age? Or is that a gross simplification of the history of ideas?
Yasser Hamdani is another iconic figure. I have great respect for him and his battle to preserve the legacy of Mr. Jinnah. I admire him for that, and I wish him well. And I don't know where he is these days, by the way. Please convey my regards to him and say, don't forget your old friends. As far as Al-Ghazali is concerned, I think Hamdani, like a lot of people, is misreading Ghazali. I would urge him to go back to Al-Ghazali, and if not Al-Ghazali himself, read the lectures or listen to the lectures of Hamza Yusuf on Al-Ghazali. And I think he'll have a better understanding and a better appreciation. But Ghazali has been very much distorted.
Okay, absolutely. So we shall definitely have Yasser Latif Hamdani convey that message to him, and I'm sure that he'll be watching this video once it comes out. And so the third and final guest question that we have, Dr. Akbar, this comes from Aisha Sarwari. She's also another Pakistani author, and she wrote her memoirs, Heart Tantrums. And this is a question which I'm also very curious to know your answer to. And her question is, Dear Dr. Ahmed, would you ever consider doing a remake of your 1998 film Jinnah in light of the new books that have come out on him?
Great question, great question. And the correct answer, Umar, is yes. I would want to, because I would want to add more nuance. I would want to add more ambiguity. And I would want to raise this whole debate of the route taken, the road less traveled taken, what if of history. The film that we made was very linear in its storyline. It was more deterministic than I would have wanted to, but that's how it turned out. And if I ever were to remake it, although I had a terrible time because it's not easy making a film, then making a film on Quaid-e-Azam in Pakistan is almost an impossible exercise because the whole nation is involved. Everyone wants to say in it. And everyone feels they have the right to make a comment. And if you don't agree, they're going to attack you and want to kill you. So I would want to, but with these different attitudes to formulating the script and the approach to Jinnah.
I would like to stay a little bit with the 1998 film Jinnah, sir, which you have produced, co-wrote. And as all of us who have seen the film know that Sir Christopher Lee, who is very well known to younger audiences as the person who played the role of Saruman in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, as well as Count Dooku in the Star Wars prequel trilogy, Sir Christopher went on record as saying that his portrayal of Jinnah was probably the single most important thing he has ever done in his entire film career. So did you have a chance to actually see him up close while he was going through, his portrayal of Jinnah, sir? And what was it like working with him? Do please share your experiences
Very
with
much,
us.
Omar, because every evening after the shoot, we were staying in this hotel in Karachi. He'd come round to my room and we'd have long chats and he'd make comments on the shoot and so on. And we had many debates about how he would portray Jinnah. For example, let me give you a proper example for the interest of your viewers. How did Mr. Jinnah speak? Now, some people were saying he should speak like Gandhi and have that Peter Sellers kind of accent. And I said, no, he'll speak like an Englishman, because Jinnah took a lot of pride in saying that if you dress like an Englishman or speak like an Englishman, that is the only way that the Englishman will respect you. Otherwise, they'll look down on you. Now, this may be correct, this may not be correct, but Jinnah had a very clear idea of it. So Mr. S.S. Pirzada was a friend of mine, and he was helping me and supporting me and an advisor to the film. So I requested Pirzada Saab to come to the hotel, and the two of us went to Lee's room and we talked. And I said, Christopher, now listen to what Mr. Pirzada, who worked with Mr. Jinnah, he was the assistant to Quaid-e-Azam, what he has to say. And Pirzada Saab said, no, he spoke just like an Englishman. And you must stick to that, speak like that, and dress like an Englishman, because that is what Mr. Jinnah would want. So just give you one small example. We became great friends in the end. Omar, I really respected him. He told me many times, he said, just like Mr. Jinnah made Pakistan, I am going to make sure that this film is completed. We had all sorts of problems, but Christopher Lee throughout was adamant, and he stuck to his desire to make the film. And if you read his autobiography called Tall, Fair and Gruesome, he had a sense of humor. In the end, he has an epilogue in which he's very kind. He thanks everyone who made the Jinnah film, and he gives me as the first name on that list. Thanks me very warmly. So we remained friends right up to the end. And he told me that he was going through a second career. He had become a musician, and he had a pop band, and he had a new batch, a new galaxy of admirers, not the old admirers from his films like Dracula and so on, and even Jinnah, but new ones because of his trilogy with Star Wars and Lord of the Rings and so on. So this was something entirely different. I had told him when we were filming, we were going through a tough time. I said, look, Christopher, just rough it out, because once it's all over, I can assure you that if you're ever in a taxi in England, where there are many Pakistani taxi drivers, I can promise you that they will never make you pay for the ride. And this was right. He'd say this. He said, every time I got into a taxi, the fellow would look up in the mirror and say, you're not Mr. Christopher Lee, are you? And then they would be big fans of his.
Fascinating. And when you do decide, if and when you do decide to do a remake of the film, sir, I'm sure that finding somebody to fill Christopher Lee's shoes is going to be a daunting task.
Yes,
but
yes.
Just out of curiosity, do you have an actor in mind who could play the part of Mr. Jinnah?
Well, Omar, when we were selecting Jinnah, we went through a long list of people, the director and people who were involved in trying to cast Mr. Jinnah. I wrote to Jeremy Irons, for example. Personally, I corresponded with him because we were considering him. He had that look. I think he would have made a very good Jinnah. So someone like that. But remember now, there's a new generation now that all this happened. You're talking about the 1990s. So there's a whole generation. And theoretically, I think we can get someone who's a popular actor, because I was very keen on this when I was making this film in the 90s, when I conceived it and came up with the idea. So I said, I want someone who is an internationally known actor. And I was under a lot of pressure. People said, take this actor from Lahore and this actor from Karachi. I said, they're great actors, and Pakistanis are really good. You saw the actor at the end of the film. He's one of Pakistan's very well-known actors. Short performance, short role, but did very well. But I said, no, if this film has to be an international film, we must have an internationally known actor. And that's why we were going for it. But then the problem was, if you have an international actor, you've got Jinnah, you've got all these superstars, then we needed a local director who must be at least Pakistani. That's why I opted for a Pakistani director. And I think the next time I make a film, I won't go in for these personal preferences, but actually go in for someone who's technically and an expert on their own merit.
Indeed. And just another tangential question, Professor, and I don't know if it's a relevant one or not, but you also mentioned the 1982 film Gandhi, where Ben Kingsley was portraying Mr. Gandhi. And in my experience, the Western world seems to be a lot more familiar with Mr. Gandhi than with Mr. Jinnah. But would you happen to have an explanation as to why that is? I mean, is it because Mr. Gandhi was seen as the pacifist, whereas Mr. Jinnah was perhaps seen more as the firebrand. Could this be one of the reasons, for
No,
example?
Omar, is more complex than that. And it's a great question because I'm constantly asking this and I'm having to face it. See, for example, let me give you a live example as a sociologist. I have a new batch of students coming every term. So about 30 students. And these are coming fresh from high school. They know very little of the world outside. American education is great, but they're not very much concerned with the outside world. So one of the questions when we are chatting, I say, all right, how many of you have heard of Mahatma Gandhi? Anyone who's heard of him, put their hands up. And almost the entire class puts up their hand.
Right.
Then I say, how many have heard of Mr. Jinnah? And except for maybe a Pakistani origin student, maybe an Indian origin student, no one will put their hands up. And I was so shocked because in this last session, I asked my class, I said, how many of you have heard of Benazir Bhutto? And no one had heard of her. No one.
Wow.
So you see, just the act of teaching, just the act of communication, just the act of sharing information for us becomes an act of passion. Because if we don't do it, Omar, this is not going to communicate. This won't spread. So I think it is an act. It has its own reward. And if you want to pursue this career, it's very important. I think I would urge all people from the Muslim world, right from Morocco to Central Asia to Bengal to Bangladesh, to act as ambassadors for that world and promote culture, ideas, knowledge of their own world to the rest of the world. And that way you'll be able to engage with Islamophobia, make friends, and hopefully close the gap between Muslims and non-Muslims.
Okay. And I think that's a really wonderful point to end this episode, sir. But because we are a podcast about books, I would be doing our viewers and listeners a disservice if I didn't ask you just two of our staple questions. And I promise to let you go after that. And so the first staple question that we have, Dr. Akbar Ahmed, is, are you more of a fiction person or a non-fiction person? What genre of books do you enjoy reading?
I enjoy reading both, but because I'm very much absorbed in writing about Islam and thinking about Islam, I read a lot of books which are non-fiction. So I love reading, especially history books on history, especially about the golden age of Islam.
And if anybody wanted to improve their knowledge of the golden age of Islam, sir, are there any books apart from your one that you would recommend as recommended reading? So
certainly the books I would say, for example, I've just mentioned for Mr. Hamdani is to read Hamza Yusuf. He's written extensively on this. Then there's Sheikh Tim Winter in Cambridge, who's also a convert to Islam and doing a great job. So there's a lot of literature available.
And from your own collection of books, sir, you've written extensively for so many years. If you could pick your top 3 books, what would be your pick from your own collection?
Again, a difficult question. But Umar, I wrote a book on Jinnah, Pakistan and Islamic identity. And that book was one of the 4 projects on Quaid-e-Azam. I call it the Jinnah Quartet. So there was the feature film. There was a documentary which was based on people who were contemporaries of Jinnah or knew him personally. Rare footage, great footage for scholars and historians. Then there was this book I'm mentioning, and then there was a graphic novel. So 4 different books for 4 different projects for different sections of society. So that would be one. Another book I would recommend is my book called Journey into America, which is based on a 1-year sabbatical, which I took and traveled with my group of assistants and students for 1 year, up and down all over America, north, south, east, west. We visited 100 mosques and interviewed African American imams and Asian imams and Arab imams, etc. And the third book I'd recommend is Journey into Europe. And again, I traveled with my team, north, south, east, west. We went to the westernmost part of Europe, easternmost part, and interviewed the chief rabbis and the grand muftis of Bosnia and the Archbishop of Canterbury and ordinary scholars and students. So it's very rich with ethnography. And it's there now, as a scholar, I can say with some element of satisfaction that I've done my job now in the field, produce this, and keeping in mind the great scholars of the golden age of Islam. I've been ruthlessly rigorous with my facts. So if I've given any facts, it's based on interviews. I've given the reference, I've given the source. And I can then sit back and say, Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. And on that note, sir, I think that this is a wonderful point on which to close this episode. So for our viewers and listeners who have been with us all this time, thank you so much for staying till the end. The book, once again, is The Flying Man, The Golden Age of Islam and Its Contribution to Science and Philosophy by Professor Dr. Akbar S. Ahmed. The book also has an alternative title, which I'll also mention, The Flying Man, Aristotle and the Philosophies of the Golden Age of Islam, Their Relevance Today. Professor, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf called you a Muslim treasure, and I cannot disagree with that, because you are a living treasure for all of us who are inspired by your books and your films and your poems and everything that you do, sir.
Thank you so much for allowing me so much time and talking to you, and please convey my love and affection to all our friends and colleagues and wonderful people back home in Bangladesh.